Hello everyone, Ben Woodruff here with another falconry video. Special shout out tonight to Travis Ross for suggesting this video in the comments of my last video. This video we're going to be talking about comparing Saker falcons to prairie falcons. These are two wonderful falconry birds. I've flown both of them and have enjoyed both of them, and they're actually very different. Now, if you're new to falconry or you're not familiar with these species, to start off with, prairie falcons are a New World falcon. They live in Canada, parts of southern, southwestern Canada, Mexico, and the United States. The Saker falcon is an Old World species. It lives over, most prominently in the Middle East. That's where we always hear about its fame. But it lives throughout southern Siberia, northern Asia, China, the Gobi Desert, and then over into parts of Europe. And in the old days, even into the Mediterranean and parts of Africa as well. But you could maybe say the center of its range is southeastern Asian desert, and the Middle East. The Saker falcon is kind of what I want to start with. But these two birds can look very similar. If you haven't seen them, prairie falcons are typically rather uniform. If you see a prairie falcon, there's not a wide range of variance in pigmentation. But prairie falcons, typically kind of brown on the back, might be dusty brown or might be more vibrant depending on their diet. Their chest is wide or creamy with streaks, brown streaks. Mallard stripe, not extremely well defined. Very much a bird of the desert. The prairie falcon, again, very uniform. In size, a prairie falcon is similar to an average peregrine. They're definitely a large falcon, but they're not enormous. But they're definitely among the larger falcons of the world. Saker falcons have a much wider range of pigmentation, and this is due most likely to such a broad range. The fact that they're pushing up into close to the snowy Arctic and then down to the edge towards India, you have a wide range of deserts and desert colors that favor different pigmentations. So the standard Saker is pretty close to a prairie falcon. Kind of a dusty brown, cream chest, and some sort of streaking on the chest, pale mallard stripe. So again, in appearance, you have some convergent evolution at work. You have a bird that is similar in appearance. But there are exceptionally dark Saker falcons and exceptionally pale Saker falcons. Now, what's really strange about the Saker is it's one of the most prolific hybridizing falcons in the wild. The reason is the north end of their range butts up against the south end of the range of gyr falcons. Gyr falcons are Arctic. They're the largest falcon in the world. Remember, a gyr can be pure black, pure white, or any shade of silver or gray in between. Sakers can be dark chocolate brown, sandy near white, and any shade of tan in between. Where their range overlaps, they often interbreed. Now, if you're reading field guides, you'll get different answers about this. Some people will say, when a gyr and a Saker hybridize, that is called an Alti falcon. There are others who say, no, the Alti falcon from the Alti mountainous region is its own subspecies of Saker. Which, however you want to define it, based off of what books you've read, the fact of the matter is, gyrs and Sakers regularly and prolifically hybridize. And then that just goes then through the populations. A gyr and a Saker have a baby, then those babies mate with the Saker, and that mates with the 3/4 Saker, 1/4 gyr, and that blah, 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 blah. The line is blurred where their populations overlap. And there are some Sakers that almost look like gyrs and some gyrs that almost look like Sakers. This has led some biologists to say, well, a Saker is really just a desert gyr falcon. Other people say, no, they're distinct enough that they're different. I think there's enough that we could classify them as separate, of course, and they taxonomically are. But it's one of those prime examples where we see life is truly fluid. Life finds a way, life interacts in ways that are fluid and changing, and we humans try to overlay a grid over so that we can wrap our heads around what life really is. But the saker and the gyr, they blend those lines and kind of erase them out for us. Having trained gyrs and sakers and prairies, I can tell you that even though they are different birds, gyrs and sakers very similar mentally. There is an extremely strange way that they will often bait that I've encountered with no other falcon. In fact, the only other bird I've encountered it with are eagles, golden eagles. Golden eagles, gyr falcons, and saker falcons do this thing where they'll bait away from you when you're first training them, and halfway through the bait, before they've reached the end of the jesses, they realize, oh yeah, I'm tied, I'm tethered, and they'll turn back at you and lunge at you. So it's this strange bait. That shows it, in my mind, just how closely related gyrs and sakers are. The fact that they have this weird, strange bait. And while we're talking about that, I don't know why, but despite how brilliant they are, gyrs and sakers both will find the most crazy, stupid ways to get themselves tangled up. If you have in just a traditional setup, a saker falcon tethered with jesses, swivel, leash, or maybe swivel, leash extender, leash, tied to a standard block perch that is built for their size, you don't leave them unattended. They will find some weird way to get tangled up, no matter how you adjust. They do. That's both gyrs and saker falcons. Sakers have, for their size, comparatively short toes. Now, gyrs do as well, and the belief is that helps prevent frostbite. For whatever reason, sakers do as well. This does not stop sakers from having tremendous gripping force with those feet. They just have short toes for a falcon. But if you're not used to birds of prey, you wouldn't look at their toes and say, those are stumpy. They're just stumpy for a falcon. Whether or not you consider gyrs and sakers to be subspecies of the same species, or you go along with the taxonomy and say they're separate close cousins, the fact is sakers are the world's second largest falcon. They have oomph, and they're very much a desert falcon in their feathers. They don't have stiff, plasticky feathers like a peregrine or a lot of other falcon species. For a falcon, they're surprisingly poofy like an owl. Their feathers shake off dust well, trap heat well, and dissipate heat well when they lift and expel heat. So they do have that dusty, soft, fluffy feel, which makes it so they cannot dive as fast. That produces more air resistance. So in a dive, a saker falcon cannot dive as fast as some of the other falcons because of that air resistance. But that's not what their strength is. Saker falcons are supreme level flight chasers. So is a gyr, but normally a gyr is trained to circle by waiting on, and then you try to have it dive down on something. And if the gyr misses, it ends up in a tail chase, which, as I mentioned in my most recent video, that can be dangerous, because if they're 5 miles away and you're on a telemetry chase trying to track them down with your telemetry receiver, an eagle might get to your bird before you do. This is the same worry with a saker falcon. I would say my personal experience trying to train a saker falcon to wait on, in a traditional waiting on sense, gyrs are about as hard as it gets. Gyrs don't have a natural inclination for waiting on. They don't see the value, and without drone or balloon or kite training, often it's a little tricky for them, which is why gyr peregrine hybrids are so good. But the gyr going up is about as hard as it gets. Sakers are so good at what they do that they are the one bird that I would say, even more than a gyr, really doesn't get like, what? Why do you want me to do this? Why am I going up? I don't get what you want, human. They certainly can be trained. I have trained sakers to wait on, but they're just looking at me like, you're an idiot. What? This isn't what I do. This is not what I'm built for. Why are you? Why? And they don't see the value in it. So it takes work to do it. The sakers I've flown, my technique, and what I've recommended to other friends who have also tried sakers out, is that let them be them. It's almost like flying an aplomato. Let them chase in level flight. Let them do their thing. Let them come up with their own thing. So they're going to go up 300 feet and go down and dive, whatever. Let them do their thing at the proper weight, and you'll have success. Sakers are built for level chasing. You can train them to wait on, but they're built for level chasing. Now, when you're talking about Middle Eastern falconry, the falcon that will pop into a lot of people's heads when you say falcon, Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, all these places, is the lanner falcon. Lanner falcons, which I need to do a video just on lanners because they're possibly my favorite falcon. Not for falconry, but they're probably my favorite falcon. Lanner falcons have the prestige of having been worked with, kept, and trained in ancient Egypt in the temples. This is the falcon that is the god Horus, with the special double-swept malar stripe. This is very distinctly the Egyptian god Horus. But we have no record of the ancient Egyptians actually hunting with these lanner falcons, just keeping them in the temples as almost like a sacred offering to have them there live in honor of the god Horus. The Saker falcon has the prestige of probably being the first bird used in falconry. In the Middle East, they were trained. What we believe happened is that ancient Bedouins saw Saker, it's hard making a life in the desert. It's hard. But they saw these Saker falcons catch large prey and large birds, and they would go scare them off and eat whatever they caught. And somebody got the idea, well, what if we train that falcon to do that for me every day? That's how we believe maybe the origins of falconry. However it was, the fact of the matter is, the areas where Bedouins typically hunt are very desolate, very open, and often very flat. So where a gyr, if you're hunting sage grouse in Wyoming, where there's sagebrush, juniper trees, and hills everywhere, if your gyr falcon goes after a sage grouse and catches it 5 miles away, you're driving after it, looking for it. This is not as big of a concern in the Middle East, because your Saker falcon, traditionally, camels were used. And a camel provides a very high point from which to scan the horizon. But this horizon is open and flat. The prey normally used to go after with Saker falcons are a bird called the habara or the bustard. It's a very large, it's a member of the plover or killdeer family, but it's like the size of a turkey. They're huge. And these are giant birds that can fly well, but they prefer a fight on the ground. So expert trackers will follow and find the tracks of these habara, these bustards, and then Saker falcons from camelback were released. Now, the traditional Bedouin falconers were using something like this, which is called a mangala. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's a carpet, it's a cuff that your falcon sits on instead of a glove. It was traditionally, though, used on the right hand. And I've done other videos about why falconers use left-handed gloves traditionally, but the mangala was used, the carpet cuff was used traditionally on the right hand from camelback in pursuit of habara bustards. Now, this tradition is alive and well and thriving today, but today trucks and Jeeps and special custom-made Mercedes vehicles with built-in telemetry and built-in perches are used today. During the fall, habara bustards migrate, and the Saker falcons are used to hunt the habara bustards. In my training, I'm in America. My landscape is very different than the Middle East, and we don't have habara bustards. So what I have done with Saker falcons is hunt pheasants, ducks, but also jackrabbits, which is one of the traditional menu items in the olden days hunted by Bedouin falconers. Normally, when you say we're hunting with big falcons, hunting fur, hunting mammals is normally frowned upon. But why? If it's something they do and something they're good at, there's nothing wrong with that. And especially since it was a traditional use of the species. In level flight, the pursuit is quite different, but Saker falcons, I've had a lot of success on both cottontails and jackrabbits with Saker falcons. And again, this is not a traditional flight in the American sense, but it is a traditional use of the Saker falcon. So, before we go on to prairies, Saker, desert bird, second largest falcon in the world, can handle quite a bit of cold, can handle the heat very well. It prefers direct pursuit flights, doesn't do as well with waiting on. Toes are kind of stumpy, but it's got very powerful grip, and it can be used to hunt anything in the normal bird realm that you would hunt with a gyr falcon or a peregrine falcon, and it can also hunt rabbits. So let's compare that now to the prairie falcon. Again, these are two species that look quite similar, but prairie falcons, prairie falcons cover a lot of range in their range. But if you were, again, to make a generalization of the types of prairies and deserts that prairie falcons inhabit, compared to the Middle Eastern deserts of the Saker falcon, the deserts prairie falcons inhabit are biological gardens. They're just, the biodiversity, both in terms of plants, organic soils, insects, and vertebrates, are through the roof. So prairie falcons, comparatively, have it much easier. If you go to these deserts that you find prairie falcons, they hunt regionally what they need. They're not afraid to go after wild mammals or wild birds. In my region, their favorite food is typically the horned lark and the meadowlark. These are comparatively small, very strong, agile birds, but they'll hunt other prey as well. And one of the things, depending on their region, they hunt a lot of ground squirrels. I've been to nests where I have seen the remains of cottontail rabbits as well. So we know they will hunt rabbits. Prairie falcons do not have a long, rich, prestigious history in the use of falconry. Remember, the sport of falconry is thousands of years old. And again, Sakers probably are the first falcon used in the sport. Prairie falcons are among the absolutely most recent additions to the repertoire of birds used in falconry. Because it's a New World bird, and falconry is, not very old in the New World, 100 years tops, depending on how you rate it. It doesn't have that much of a history. And early falconers who were practicing falconry in America were mimicking European falconry, where the peregrine falcon held such a place of honor. So most early American falconers are choosing a peregrine, which in my opinion is a better hunting bird anyways. But when it started to become apparent that because of the pesticide DDT, that peregrine falcons were becoming an endangered species in the United States, suddenly they were no longer allowed to be used in the sport of falconry. And so falconers, both seasoned falconers as well as young new falconers coming into the sport, I want to practice actual falconry with a large long-winged bird. What do I use? What's available? The prairie falcon. And so really it's the 60s and 70s is when, 1960s and 1970s is when prairie falconry truly came into existence. When these falconers learned, and it's interesting talking to how some of the falconry was practiced. One of my mentors, Steve Shingren, had told me stories of where they would go out in a station wagon with their prairie falcons, and they'd look out the window, and when they flushed up a pheasant, they'd watch where it landed, and somebody would watch, and they'd hop out, and they'd off the fist try these techniques of going after, and they had success going after these pheasants with prairie falcons. And it's interesting, a lot of this was comparatively off the fist flight style, or going up a little ways and going after. This is the dawn of the prairie falcon. Since that time, people have proven the prairie falcon as a serviceable hunting bird. It's been flown mostly in the traditional sense, training them to wait on, go up, circle up, and dive down. But the prairie falcon, even though it's got a very brief window of use in modern falconry, it's a different bird. It's not a Saker. It is built much closer to a peregrine as far as its structure and also its size. It's significantly smaller than a Saker falcon. For its size, the toes are much longer than that on a Saker falcon. Now, of course, the Saker has longer toes because it's a bigger bird, but if you make a prairie the size magically of a Saker, the prairie will have much longer toes, much more reminiscent of peregrine falcon feet. They are a desert bird. They are built for the desert, and so because of that, like a saker, their feathers are fluffier, softer than a peregrine. However, they are stiffer and more plasticky than the feathers of a saker falcon. They are independent and strong-willed, intelligent, strong-willed, like a gyr or a saker, so they are prone to self-hunt and wander, and it does take extra work to train them to wait on. They don't get it nearly as easily as a peregrine does, but they do it much more easily than a saker, or a gyr for that matter, in my mind, based off of the birds I've trained. So if I had to put them on a good description, if you say, here's a saker, a level flight, direct pursuit chasing falcon that can be trained to wait on with loose fluffy feathers. Here's a peregrine way over here with stiff plasticky feathers and an inclination to naturally go up and wait on and kill right in front of you. I put a prairie halfway in between. In its build, in its structure, in its size, in its feather consistency, and its willingness to wait on. I don't know if that's good or bad, but I know people who have done significant hunting with prairies and level flight on jackrabbits almost exclusively. And I know people who are passionate about the species but love traditional hawking and have dedicated all their time to only training prairies to wait on in a traditional sense. If you compare them, a prairie falcon that waits on does so without the umph and the gusto of a peregrine. They do great. You can train them to wait on fine. You can train them to hunt all kinds of large birds. But if you look at the ease of which a peregrine or a gyr peregrine hybrid does it, there's no contest. A prairie's like, okay, I'm going up, and a peregrine's like, yes, this is what we're doing. They understand it much more clearly than a prairie falcon does. And so, two very unique birds, the saker falcon and the prairie falcon. In some ways, they're very similar. In some ways, they're radically different. Saker has a desert that's just that bit much more arid than what a prairie falcon lives in. So enough to be similar, but also different enough to make two very different birds. We have in most parts of the world that have big falcons, the most parts of the northern hemisphere that have big falcons, there's a very specific formula. If you're anywhere in the world, you have a peregrine, but you're also going to have a saker falcon, and you're also going to have some little something or other, a lanner or a lagger, something that fits that role. So you kind of have these three big falcon species. We don't in the Americas. If you get far enough north, you have a gyr filling that role, but if you're that far north in the old world, you also have a gyr. So you have a gyr, a saker, a peregrine, and a lanner or a lagger or something similar. Here, we're missing one. We don't have that lanner role. We don't have that saker role. So we've got a gyr, if they're here, a peregrine, and the prairie has to bump up and fill some of that role of the saker and bump down and fill some of that role of the fluffy lanner. So they're kind of filling three roles that in the old world regionally usually are filled by three separate falcons. And over here, one bird's doing all three. So I think that's kind of interesting. This is just a quick introduction. It wasn't very quick because it's something I'm very excited about. But I hope you'll suggest more videos. I'd love to do some more comparisons. Let me know what species you would like to see compared. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe. That really helps me build this channel. And as always, happy hawking.